Welcome back to Sledgehammer Horror, guys. I am Ken Sledge, and let's talk horror. Now, today I'm joined by the amazing Jim Cannatelli. Jim, how you doing today?
Good, my friend. How are you doing?
I am doing very well. Thank you so much for being here. It's such an honor. It's been a year in the making, guys. That's how long it takes sometimes to make these things actually come into fruition and make them happen. But, Jim, before we talk about why you're here, I would like for the people that don't know you to get to know you a little bit. You are a writer and director. Recent films such as X Night, Escape from Warp Hell, and Yesteryears, which are based on your own run of X Night comic books. So, um, now when it comes to the comic books, what got you started into comics first and foremost?
I definitely have to give a shout out to my late mum, Wanda Cannatelli. She gave me my first comic book and would take me to this little comic book store. I used to be near where they lived. I got into making films for when I was like 10, 12, using like a cheap camcorder, and always wanted to make my own comics. I throughout high school, I always loved to draw, so I would just draw like character designs really, and I would try doing like comic book panels, just like very crude. And in 2014, I met my friend Buzz Hassan, who's a comic book creator, and he made this comic book called The Living Corpse. He's a co-creator of it. Him and his friend Ken Hager and their friend Blair Smith were the makers of it. So I was like, hey, I have this superhero called X Knight. He's this gothic superhero inspired from like Tim Burton's Batman, Sam Raimi's Dark Man, The Shadow. And I don't know how to make a comic book. So since you and your friends know how to, can I make a documentary and just see how you guys do it? Just for my own schooling, really.
Right.
And Buzz was more than happy to let me film them. He's like, yeah, absolutely. Ask us any questions. Come with us at various conventions. And yeah, so we made this 30-minute documentary. It's called Inked: The Art of the Living Corpse. And so then 2015, I released the first X Night comic, and I very much, was inspired from the works of like Jim Steranko, Tom McFarlane, Frank Miller, like the usual, like classic, legendary artists. But yeah, it was something I always wanted to do because being a Tim Burton fanboy and his Batman movie specifically, I thought, well, I want to do that, create my own gothic hero. Because when I was 10, like I made these cheap films with a camcorder and action figures, apparently that's how Christopher Nolan got his start too, apparently. But at one point my dad told me, he's like, you should try to create your own superhero for three reasons, Jim. One, so you don't have to ask for the rights or permission.
Bingo.
Two, you probably have more fun, creating new ideas. And he said, and then three, you don't have to worry about pissing off the fans if you do anything different.
And those are all three very, very good pieces of advice.
Yeah.
Um, but not just doing that, you've also acted in horror films as well, Aphasia, Slaughter Beach, as well as the fan film Halloween 7, Return of the Curse, and The Gifted. So we know what got you into comic books, but what got you into acting?
So, um, so I was a writer and director first. I made a bunch of short films while I was in high school and college. And yeah, I really didn't see myself as an actor, being the big
Yeah.
commanding presence, like, because I always loved creating the stories, and the characters. But sometimes in my shorts, I would act like as a small character, like kind of like a Tarantino cameo or something,
Sure.
mainly because I couldn't get anyone else to play that small role. So that was fun, but I didn't think anything of it. And it was really, it was Slaughter Beach. Was the first like acting gig I did for Dan, because we went to college together, me, him, and Brett Taylor. So I was in the original choice for Fishman Sam. My original job on Slaughter Beach was props and costume.
Yeah.
Ironically, for Fishman Sam and Awesome Boy, I made his AB logo. But yeah, the bait can, the logo, the bait shop sign, all that was a lot of fun to make. Like in retrospect, like making props was a lot of fun, and Dan had a certain look he wanted, and um, yeah, the original actor Brock Vickers, very talented guy, was the original actor, and unfortunately, he just didn't have he couldn't he had prior commitments to other
Sure.
projects, so um, they had me do an audition, and yeah, the rest is cinematic history. But
Well,
yeah, I
and
was
it's
nervous.
amazing when you can go from, all the different things that you do, whether it's a writer, a director, with the comic books, with horror, everything that you've done. Like it's how do you make time to balance all these things at once?
Yeah, it is tricky, man, and especially with, like, we all have day jobs, to pay the bills. But yeah, thankfully, like, I just use the weekends as my time to work on the comics, and I try to pace it out because, like, in on any film, especially us independent filmmakers, everyone has different schedules and availability, so there's sometimes a waiting period. We're like, okay, so and so's not available till this time, so all right, I can work on this X Night comic or Doctor Nightmare or Bob the Roach, and then with, like, acting, like, yeah, I just started really doing that with The Gifted and Aphasia had a bit part. Yeah, I just try to, when the director or producer give me the shooting schedule and whatnot, it's like, okay, like, just work around it.
Right.
Um, yeah, and thankfully, with it's independent filmmakers, so we're all in the same boat. So everyone has different availability.
Well, a good part of that is everybody kind of understands the game for everybody else, trying to work around and make time for everybody. And
Yeah,
man, it's amazing. Like I said, in order for you to be a part of the horror genre, to do things like Slaughter Beach and Aphasia, horror had to start for you somewhere, Jim. So now I would like to go back to the past and talk about what it was that got you started in the horror genre, your first horror movie. And Jim, the first horror movie you watched was
Jaws with and yeah, I have my mom to thank for this, because I was like 9, 10 years old, and it was playing on TV, and my mom was like, "Oh, we're gonna watch this," because I saw this when I was 9 years old in the theaters, and it was like a fond childhood memory for my mom. So it was a cool, like, mother son passing the torch kind of thing, and yeah, and I still don't like going in the ocean today.
Oh,
How
I
I
bet.
because yeah, it was, even as a 33-year-old, it's like, oh, it still holds up. It's still the best shark movie, really. But yeah, it was that opening scene that was the most impactful, because you don't see the shark, you don't see what it is. It's just the POV, the meme shot of the girl getting pulled underwater.
Yeah.
It could be anything in the water. It could be Cthulhu, or whatever, a giant squid. So the fear of the unknown, I didn't realize it until I was older and more mature to understand it. It's like, oh, that's why it works. It's not just the fear of the shark, but of the unknown.
Right. And this movie is just a huge happy accident. All the things that happened on the set that made this movie what it is, whether it be the improv lines, the shark not working. Um, do you know the story about the iconic jump scare in the boat with the shark tooth?
Oh yeah, Richard Dreyfuss,
Yeah,
the head.
that well, when they that whole thing was not a part of the original cut of the film. They had a test screening, and Spielberg was like, "This still needs something," and they went back and recut that and filmed that whole thing in Spielberg's swimming pool. And I try to tell people like that's why Steven Spielberg is Steven Spielberg, because you have this iconic jump scare, and one of the jump scares that people talk about, like as one of the major parts of this movie. Well, a lot of the times I talk about this movie, I talk about the tooth and the head falling out of the underwater boat. Um, and again, Spielberg was like, "This needs something. Let's do this." Um, so that's again a scene that I talk about a whole lot. But you talked about the opening. Was that the scene that affected you the most?
Yeah, it definitely does. Because there's been times throughout my life when I would go to the beach and be out in the water, and you know, I don't hear the song necessarily, but it's just because when you're in the water, it's kind of claustrophobic a bit because when you're up to your neck, right? You try to move your legs or arms, you can't move them in the normal
Right.
motion when you're out of water. It's almost like very slow, and you can't see what's in there. It's not like I was at the Caribbean or somewhere. It's clear blue water. It's murky, and yeah, that scene made it creepy. I mean, it's definitely not the only scene in Jaws that was impactful. The one with the severed head of the fisherman falling out, that was freaky. But
Yeah.
the other one is, I think the first time we see the shark, like it's the guy in the red rowboat, he gets knocked over and he's starting to climb back onto his boat, and then it's just this one shot that you see through the water is the shark's jaw just like opening. It's like maybe 1 second or less, but that alone was like freaky.
What's funny, you get that teaser, and then you actually finally get Bruce, when he comes on, and then you get, right after you see the shark, he's out there throwing the chum, and then you see him, and that you get the most iconic line in the movie,
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
which is again a happy accident, a total improv line that was just said on the spot, and it's still to this day is a scene that we all quote.
Yeah.
So we talk about what scene affected you the most, Jim, but what would you say your favorite scene from Jaws is?
Either when Hooper and Brody meet Quint for the first time in his old bait shop, or when he's talking about the Indianapolis. Because that scene's great when they're on the Orca. He's talking a bone chilling story about how he was on the Indianapolis, and then before they're like, and then they're later on they're singing and laughing, and
Yeah,
then the shark attacks. It's like there's just a lot of crazy shit one after another. But I even like the more subtle scenes where it's Brody and his wife, like just chilling. You know what I mean? Like
yeah.
he's reading a book so intently about sharks, and she like just rubs his shoulder, and he gets like scared. She's like, "Oh, I'm sorry." Little
Go
stuff
back
like
to reading your book, honey.
that.
But I mean, I gotta ask because yes, Jaws is a franchise. There are four films in this franchise. So whenever I talk about a franchise film, I always ask, which is your favorite movie in the Jaws franchise?
Oh, outside of the first one.
No, I mean, let's go outside of the first one because we
Okay,
know it's going to be the first one. But
the first one's always the best in that case. Yeah, it's rare that where the sequel is better than the original. There are ones out there though. But okay, outside of Jaws one, probably the second one because Chief Brody's back, and I was sad that Quint died, but Hooper was just didn't appear. But I was glad Brody was there, and it's with his family again. Like, okay, it felt like a continuation rather than a whole new thing. Whereas even though Jaws 3 and 4, the Brody family's there, just the father isn't. It's the sons, but still, it's just
definitely
there's
not the same.
nah.
And I actually think Jaws 2 is a super underrated movie.
Yeah,
I'm a huge fan of Jaws 2. I know a lot of people are just like, oh, it's not Jaws, and it's not. I agree. It's not what Jaws was, but compared to 3 and 4, it's a fucking masterpiece of film. So,
yeah.
um, you'll nobody will ever hear me talk shit on Jaws 2 because I think the movie is fucking fantastic, and I think it's the perfect double feature with the first film. Like watching those two back to back is a great double feature, fun with the family type of night. So, um, another question I always ask, and I think I know the answer, Jim, but I gotta ask you anyway. Remakes, requels, that kind of all the rage in Hollywood. If they can get their hands on a property, they're gonna do it. Is Jaws a movie that you would like to see remade today?
fuck no. No way, man. Yeah, because they've already tried remaking it anyway. It's just called other different shark movies.
Right.
The only time a different shark movie I think really worked was 47 meters down.
Yeah, those are good.
Yeah, that one.
They actually just announced they're going to be doing a third installment.
Oh, okay. I didn't
So
see the second one. I didn't even know the second one was made. Whoops.
yeah, they're both really really good. So yeah, I can strongly recommend checking out the second one because I agree with you. I think that those are very well made films too.
Yeah,
Um,
just
because
that
they
one
use
shot
that
in the
fear
first.
of the unknown as well.
Yeah, and even though the sharks are CGI in that first movie, like it worked because they used the darkness of the ocean, which was smart.
Yes. So, we talked about your first horror movie, Jim, and what that means to you. But here for a second, I do want to throw a little bit of a curveball your way. My little buddy Ghostface is here, and he has a question for you. What's your favorite scary movie, Jim? What is your favorite horror movie of all time?
It, some people may not consider it a horror movie, but I do. It's Seven by David Fincher.
Totally a horror flick. Like, if someone could look me in the eyes and straight face tell me Seven is not a horror film, they're gonna have to try to tell me that The Silence of the Lambs isn't a horror film either. Um,
Exactly,
just because
exactly.
it's a police procedural does not mean that it's not a horror film. And I think Seven is horrific.
Yeah,
Um, and
and
I love the movie.
not for nothing, but like years later with the Saw movie, that's about a cop hunting a serial killer. Rip,
Yeah.
yeah. Seven was a huge influence, whether they've said that or not. It definitely is.
All we
But I think
need is
John Doe is way. I always thought John Doe was way scarier than Jigsaw.
yeah. Well, John Doe is just so cold. Where Jigsaw does have this human element to him, and in his own mind, even though it's sick and twisted, he thinks he's helping people. John Doe is just like, so I took her head. I took her pretty little head. You're just like, what? Like, that scene to me, obviously, it's been memed 1,000 times, what's in the box. But the first time you see that, it is so fucking heavy, and then when Brad Pitt's looking at him and he's got the gun trained on him, and then he looks down and he sees that one reel of her face before he
Oh,
starts shooting. And I fucking shot him. Like it's just like, and he's telling him, become Wrath, become who I made you out to be. And so John Doe, even though he does get shot, he really does win in the end of that film.
he does. And it's
So
interesting, like when Fincher, when they filmed it, the original ending was it's the helicopter POV shot of you just see Mills just walking out into his lost humanity, just that shot, which you see in the movie. But the added scene where Morgan Freeman, as Detective Somerset, he quotes Hemingway, like the world is a fine place and worth fighting for. I agree with the second part. That apparently was a last minute addition because the I think the studio heads told Fincher, like, look, we'll let you have the head in the box, but there's got to be some kind of, you know what I mean,
yeah.
bittersweet. And I thought, you know what, I actually liked that because I love
And I
Somerset's one of my favorite characters in movies, so I love what that said about him.
Well, and I just love the fact that we don't see the head in the box. That mystery is left to us. You know what I mean? Going back to Bruce the Shark. Sometimes it's the unknown that's even worse. I've always said there's nothing scarier than what happens up here. What I can imagine, there's nothing scarier than that. So, man, I do want to say thank you so much, Jim, for coming to hang out with me and talk about you and your first horror movie and all these other things that are so important to you. But before I let you go, we always go back to the same question. We're going to bounce back to Jaws. And what we're going to do here is rank this movie on a skull count. Now, we're not ranking it on acting, production, score, direction, nothing like that. We're not being critics. All we're doing is ranking this movie on how much it affected you on your first viewing. So, 0 skulls being not effective, 5 being extremely effective. You can use half and quarter skulls anywhere in the middle. Jim, what would your ranking of Jaws be?
I'd say a solid 5 because it's
Mhm.
still as effective to me now as when I saw it as a kid. It's like honestly, it's one of my Fourth of July traditions is just
Yeah.
watching.
This is a total Independence Day film, man. This and I Know What You Did Last Summer. Jaws in the Day, I Know What You Did Last Summer at Night. It's a perfect double feature on a 4th of July, man.
Definitely.
I didn't say this at the
Yeah.
beginning, guys, but I should have. I have all of Jim's social media links down in the description. So make sure that you're following him on social media so you can become a part of that family as well. That way you can stay up to date on all the amazing things that he's going to be doing for us here in the future. So, Jim, please don't go anywhere. I got a couple more questions for you. Everyone else, if you haven't already, please like and subscribe. It really does help build the channel more than you know. And follow Sledgehammer Horror on social media. Our links are in the description as well. But until next time, keep talking horror, stay what you are, and we'll see you guys soon.